All right, strap in because returning to the Blockcast is the man, the myth, the legend, Andrew Crowley, aka Runnin Hoops Pod. Andrew, what's up, man?
you know, New Heights gets Taylor Swift, you get me. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, which podcast is going to get more views.
All I can say is who's got it better than us?
That's right. Nobody.
Nobody. Andrew, man, it's good to have you back on the podcast, and obviously we're inching closer and closer to the football season kicking off. But I thought this would be a good opportunity with Utah finally announcing their non-conference schedule in full, which has been interesting to follow because we've learned about certain games and certain matchups along the way, but Utah elected to hold off until they had the schedule complete, and so they announced it earlier this week. And I think I thought would be appropriate to get you on the podcast to pick your brains and get your thoughts. You've already published an episode on the Runnin Hoops Pod, which is great. Let the people know where they, if they don't already listen to you, but let them know where they can find you.
Yeah, it's over wherever you get a podcast. Just look up Runnin Hoops Podcast. I published an episode on Thursday. It's called Hold All Calls. The Runnin' Utes have released their schedule because, I'm a self-proclaimed scheduling nerd. I search high and low for games. I'm on like the directional Oregon, websites looking to see if maybe Utah's playing them in an exhibition or something. Now I don't know what I'm going to do with my free time.
I was just
Now
about
that
to
the
ask.
schedule's out.
Yeah, there's probably so much free time now. Like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I've got a comprehensive Big 12 preview that I'm working on, that I'm digging in
Ooh,
on, but I'm also looking forward to this football season. I tell you what, opening in the Rose Bowl, not much better than that. I can tell you that
oh
much.
yeah, oh yeah. That'll be a fun one, man. We are about 2 weeks out from that game kicking off. Just just incredibly exciting. August hits and it's like feels like it's going so fast, and then once we get to like the second, third week of fall camp, time just slows down, and you're just like, oh, can we get there already? And
Yeah.
so the excitement builds, and obviously now, with basketball, it's only going to continue to grow. I think there's a lot of excitement for good reason for Utah basketball this season, and so let's dive into it. Let's dive into the schedule. Utah announced it, I believe, on Monday or Tuesday. They announced and released the full non-conference schedule, and I'm gonna pull it up here in just a sec. But Andrew, I'll just ask you, when you saw the list, when you saw everything non-conference exhibition games, first glance, first impression, what'd you think of the non-conference schedule?
Yeah, it was about what I expected for year one for Alex Jensen. They're going to play a couple of challenging games, against Power Five teams in the non-con, couple of road games, an MTE. But there's certainly no murderer's row here, right? Like
Right.
they've got some really nice games baked in. But I got to say, I love the two exhibition games
Yeah.
against Nevada and at Oregon. You talk about like, us trying to uncover games. I mean, that was like tenfold when they had the secret scrimmages of years
Yep.
past, right? Where you're like, hey, Keanu Dawes had 10 points in the secret scrimmage. He's gonna take off this year or whatever. We don't have to worry about that anymore. And so I love that they're getting two good tests that
Yeah.
don't count at all. And then they jump right into their schedule. And I think it sets up really nice for them.
Yeah, that I'm glad you brought up the exhibition games to get that first one versus Nevada at home. I think is great. Then you go to Oregon for an exhibition game, and man, I hope they put in the fine print like we reserve the right to count this as our season opener if if specific circumstances are met, because Obviously Utah and Oregon have a long history, and what better time to take on a Dana Altman team than at the beginning of the year rather than the end of it. And so, frankly, I think that Oregon exhibition game is going to be a really good test for Utah, where they're going to learn a lot about themselves. Oregon isn't necessarily the biggest team, but they do have Nathan Biddle returning, and he's a big guy. And obviously, the biggest concern right now with Utah is their size, and so I think they're going to learn a lot about themselves in that exhibition game and how to handle competing against the big. So that'll be interesting. First glance, that's what stood out. Like, we had kind of a feel for what was coming with the schedule with some of the games that had not been officially announced, looking at Cal and Washington. But seeing Nevada, seeing Oregon, I thought those are two really good teams to schedule as exhibition games. And then, you get into the regular season, the season opener, you open up with 6 straight home games. And, this is really a tale of two schedules, essentially, the first half and the second half. And I think this is a great way to, for Alex to kind of figure some things out through the first 6 games, allow his team to gel and build that chemistry through, quality, air quotes, competition. We kind of understand what they're going to be competing against, looking at that list with Purdue, Fort Wayne, and Sam Houston State. But, Sam Houston State came to Utah a couple years ago and gave them a pretty tough test. So I think that'll be really good for Alex to kind of figure some things out through those first 6 games, because that second half of the non-conference schedule gets a lot tougher.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much buzz and excitement around the men's basketball program for the first time in years. And so I think it's a good, it's almost like a good reward for the fans that they're playing these 6 straight home games to start off. I mean, San Jose State is, coming out of the Mountain West, right? And so they're not your traditional, again, SWAC team or directional Montana that, a lot of teams open with on opening night. And so, and Tim Miles is a seasoned coach. He's been around, and he can coach him up. So I think it'll be some good tests, all winnable games, and really will give them a lot of excitement, momentum, and really a chance for Alex and his staff to tinker with the lineup as well. In those first 6 games, right? Like, we're going to spend a lot of time in the lead up to to the season talking about, well, who's the starting 5? Who are the first couple of guys off the bench? Everybody should play in those first 6 games, and everybody should get experience, unless, they're planning on redshirting somebody. But,
Right.
Absent that, like, I think it sets up for them really nicely and gives them, enough of a runway to this MTE that I'm sure we'll talk about here, and getting Grand Canyon. And then, to your point, that back half of the schedule where, they've played together for a few games and they're not just going in, kind of cold like the team did last year when they played Mississippi State early and they had all those injuries.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty significant to, get those 6 home games, and not just for what it means on the floor with the team, with the players. Obviously that's most important, is how those guys gel and come together, because playing in the Big 12, they're going to need to play some good basketball. And so getting together on the same page early in the season, potentially getting to that second half and maybe still in a game or two that come as a surprise, I think would be great. But too, kind of to your point that you hit on is, the fans and the fan base, to get 6 home games to welcome in the Alex Jensen era, I think is such a fantastic thing for Utah to really kind of build momentum going into that second half of the non-conference schedule and getting into Big 12 play. I think, it's going to be really important for Alex and for, this Runnin Ute squad, to obviously come together. I think it's going to be really important to provide, at least excitement and things that are clearly pieces that Alex will be able to build with. So I think, with the way that things have gone the last couple of years for Utah fans, and even just beyond the last few years, over the last decade, really, with the way that things have gone for Utah fans, I think this is a great opportunity, like I said, with those 6 games to usher in the new era under Alex Jensen, and then get after it in the second half.
Yeah, for sure. And barring a real, step on a rake type situation, I mean, they should be 6-0
Yeah.
in these games, and that's just going to continue to build momentum for them, get the players some confidence, and hopefully allow them to against those live bullets, right? The live action, really play together and kind of figure out who works well together and who those optimal lineups are.
Yeah. Yeah, and so to your point that you were getting to is that gets us to the Acusera series. I think I said that right. Maybe I butchered that. But they're MTE, where
Yeah.
they'll open up with Grand Canyon and then they'll play either Iowa or Ole Miss. I think that's, you know, two really solid opponents to have in an MTE like this, and potentially for Utah, like we're talking about here, is it's very possible that you go into that at 6-0, feeling good about yourself, playing good basketball. It's going to be your first tough test, but against Grand Canyon, I think there should be enough there where you feel like you can get a win against a quality opponent and on a neutral site, add a nice little win to the resume, and then you're going to face a tough test in that next game. And I think that's kind of a sweet spot for Utah to build that momentum, to build and work through some things, and then getting into that MTE, which is something that you also alluded to allow them to work through those things and build momentum properly. The timing of it, the sequencing of the schedule, I think is really good, to hit the road and be on a neutral site, get away from home, and test yourself. I think that's going to be a really fun series to see how Utah, given the talent that they've brought in, how that checks out against these talented teams. Grand Canyon has been a surprise program over the last couple of years, but they've recruited good players. They've recruited a lot of talent into that program now, and so that'll be a good first test.
Yeah, that's a really interesting game for a number of reasons, right? Like Grand Canyon lost quite a bit of their talent from last year's team that won the WAC and went to the NCAA tournament, but that was a deep team, and so they do
Yeah,
have a couple of pieces back. And then to your, like you said, they brought in some transfers. Bryce Drew can coach, and they're also stepping up in weight class by joining the Mountain West this year. And
yeah,
so I just think that's a really good test for Utah on a neutral floor. You know, the best team they will have played to that point. Not in the exhibition, and then you sort of are a winner either way. If with Ole Miss or Iowa from a net ranking standpoint, right? Like
hmm,
those two teams will probably be in the top 50, top 75 of the net all year long. If you get Ole Miss, I mean that's going to be a huge
yeah,
test for them. Iowa is sort of in the same position that Utah is in, breaking in a new coach, but they've recruited the portal incredibly well, and so it's just a really interesting 2-game series here, and it's because you get Grand Canyon first, and and this is no disrespect to the Lopes,
yeah,
there's no like losers bracket in this tournament, right? Where if you lose that opening game, whereas in the past in like the Diamond Head or the Myrtle Beach or whatever, if you lost your first game, you got slotted with a bunch of mid majors
right,
essentially, and then you were sort of having to, if you lost to them, it was super embarrassing, right? You don't
right.
have that in this, right? You're getting Iowa or Ole Miss no matter what happens in that first game. And so I think that's going to be a really good test for them.
Yeah, and then you're after that, after those 2 games, you're going to be on the road at Cal, and I think I love the old Pac-12 flavor in this non-conference schedule. Obviously, with Oregon as the exhibition, you've got Cal on the road with what Mark Madsen has done there with California, and then you've got Washington to finish it up. But even Steve Alford at Nevada, like just there's a lot of ties to the old Pac-12, and I thought that was really cool. But going on the road to Cal, that's going to be a fascinating matchup with what Madsen has done there, building that program. Them competing in the ACC and making some noise in that league last year. Really fascinated to see how Utah stacks up in a true road test, right? I think that's going to be really, really interesting. And then, you come home, Cal Baptist, another neutral site game against Mississippi State. That's going to be a fun, an interesting one. I don't know if it'll be fun yet. We'll learn if it'll be fun as we get closer to it and see these guys in action. But what do you make of the rest of the schedule after we get through that MTE?
Yeah, I think the Cal game is really interesting. I don't think folks thought that Mark Madsen would struggle as much as he has
Right.
so far at Cal. And like recruiting is not the issue because Mark Madsen is a heck of a recruiter.
Yeah,
It's just the
he's got some
pieces,
dudes in there.
haven't quite fit. File this under, stats only I know. But I think Utah has won the last 3 times they've played at Haas Pavilion. And so, hey, wait, what's for? Right. So,
Right.
so that's a real good chance, to go on the road, get a win, get some confidence. Mississippi State, I think they're going to be in the mix for the NCAA tournament, no question.
Yeah.
And, guys like Rothstein and some of the other experts have them in the upper tier, upper half of the SEC. And so, that's really going to be an opportunity for Salt Lake and Utah fans to show out the way that Mississippi State fans did last
Yeah.
year in Biloxi or Tupelo or wherever they played last year in that like 2,000 seat arena.
Right.
And so I love that game. They should play a game at the Delta Center every year, if not 2 or 3. And then the roadie at Washington, again, a familiar foe, an arena
Yep.
that we're all used to seeing on TV, a coaching staff that's very familiar to Utah fans as well. But that's a big spending program, right? Like
Yeah, it is.
Washington's got some high expectations. And so I think that's a game that really, really gets you set for Big 12 play, which will be, coming up on, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you finish with Washington. And, Washington is going to be really fascinating this year. They've got a lot of size. That's going to present some interesting matchups and how Utah, handles that. That's going to be, I was looking through rosters earlier today and they've got, 4 or 5, 6 guys that are at least 6'11". So they have a lot of size. That's going to be, not just a great test in the sense that you're going to Washington and you're facing a program that invests in a lot, schematically and personnel wise. Like that's going to be a tough matchup as well. So I'm with you there. I think that'll have them prepped and ready to go for Big 12 conference play and we'll hit the ground running. So, now that we've kind of ran through the schedule, let me ask you now, just what are you looking forward to with this Runnin' Utes team with the non-conference schedule? Just what do you think the storylines are going to be as we get closer to the season and as we get into the first couple weeks, couple months of action for Alex Jensen and the Runnin' Utes?
Yeah, I think we're going to find out pretty quickly, whether, how bought in this team is, because you're playing 6 games right off the bat that you're supposed to win.
Right.
And, a lot of teams and Utah teams in the last, as we've talked about, decade or so have sort of done this. They kind of coast in some of those games, and you can
Right.
harken back to, Sam Houston walking in, punching him in the mouth and beating him, Southern Utah pushing them to like a near buzzer beater.
Right.
I think that Alex and his staff establishing their culture, their expectations, what he's talked about as his non-negotiables. Like, I think we're going to see that on full display in these first couple of games where they're really going to go out and look to lock these teams down. Doesn't matter, that, Holy Cross is, 300 plus in Torvik or Ken Palm or whatever. Like, I don't think that stuff is going to matter to this team and this staff. So I think one of the storylines heading into the year is just going to be, okay, we've talked about roster building, we've talked about assembling talent, we've talked about guys who do things the right way. Are we going to see that on the court? Right. And so I think that's going to be, a big storyline. And then as the schedule goes on, it's, can they hang?
Yeah.
Can they hang with teams that are in their peer group in the Power Five, whether that's Ole Miss, Iowa, Mississippi State, Cal, or Washington? And so I think, those things are going to be the big time storylines, because we're going to find out, I think, fairly quickly what this team's going to look like in Big 12 play based on their performance in some of these other games.
Yeah, I had a very similar thought. I wrote down the first thing is exactly that, first impression, right? Like, getting a look at this team, seeing what they're about, seeing the talent, seeing how well they work together, not just in the sense of first impression being an exciting type of thing, but I think it's going to be important for Alex to make a good first impression, because that'll do a lot for the fan base, right? Like I said earlier, the fan base, it's been a tough time for Utah fans, the last little while.
Yeah.
And I think that first impression will go a really long ways for Alex and this squad. And then to your point, right, seeing what the product actually looks like. I think there's a lot of intrigue around how this team is going to play, right? We know that they've brought in some talented players, some guys that certainly have to make leaps, some guys that have to make significant strides in their games, but undeniably, they've brought in a lot of talent, a lot of athleticism. And I think we all kind of have an idea of what sort of brand of basketball they want to play, but we don't know for sure. And I think that's going to be really exciting to learn, really intriguing to see what, Alex, how he sort of puts this offense together, and what sort of structure and emphasis he puts on the defensive end of the ball, or defensive end of the floor. And so that's going to be really, really interesting, is exactly that, just the first impression. And then, again, where can you find a signature win? I think that's going to be really important. And, he's going to have a few opportunities away from home to get a nice signature win. He'll have one, at the Delta Center as well, and a great opportunity for him against, Mississippi State. But he'll have, a handful of opportunities away from home to potentially win one. And as we've learned over the years, that road games are something to some programs. To others, they're nothing and meaningless, apparently. And so I think, Alex can get off to a good start getting a road win, which Utah it's just evaded Utah for whatever reason the last couple of years. So I think that'll be a big thing. And then too, just going through the ebbs and flows of this team, working through it, coming together. There are going to be bright moments. There are going to be some lows, and I think how this team responds to those highs and lows will be really interesting. So those are things that I'm going to be looking forward to with this team as we get into closer to the season and into non-conference play, and then we'll go from there. But would be curious, Andrew, just your thoughts overall now that we're here in August. Now that the team has been put together, now that they're kind of getting some traction on the recruiting trail with stuff. Just what are your thoughts on the program? And you can take it whichever direction you want.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that the vibes have kind of died down a little bit, because they're just putting in the work, right? Like, Alex has, he's done the car wash interview circuit, and he's got his staff in town. Martin Schiller's now in town. I think the international players that were expected to join the program, later in the summer are here, or at least will be here this week, or in the near future, because classes start soon.
I think
right?
Abby is here. I think I saw
Abby's
something. He's
here.
here.
I'm
Yep.
sure Joshua Hayes is floating around Salt Lake City
Yep.
somewhere, and all of that. And so, you know, I think the program is in a good spot. You know, they've got the support that they need. They, as you have pointed out, you know, they've upgraded their talent. They've got some really solid coaching, and now it's just a matter of putting that all together and then convincing the next wave of recruits and other players. You know, I think we've been hearing people point to the 2026 class, the 2027 class as kind of key classes for the state of Utah, but also for this program. And so, you know, there's also this, you know, kind of prove it sort of,
Yep.
sort of thing that Alex now has to do. He's got to go out and show that his, you know, philosophy, his, you know, path to win, as he said in many interviews, is the right one, right? And that
Right.
he and Wes Wilcox, you know, put together the right kind of roster to go out and compete. And so that's, you know, I know I'm rambling here a little bit,
No,
but
you're
you
good.
know, kind of jumping back to one of the things that you talked about with how do they respond, right? You know, I used on the podcast uh, that Brian Kelly clip over and over again, where he's talking about, you know, we're here talking again about the same things, and that's how it's been for Utah basketball the last couple of years. And so, even in a loss, if you've got a team that's not defending, not rebounding, right, not blocking out, all of those little things, that I think is where folks are going to start to be like, okay, well, wait a second,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
that's where the vibes are going to change a little bit. But you know, I don't necessarily anticipate that happening. I'm just saying that, like, I think those some of those things are going to be the telltale signs. You
Yep.
know, like, it's super easy to win games at home. It's a whole different thing to go into a neutral environment, you know, to go on the road, even in some of these venues that are not filled, right? Like some of the old Pac-12 venues like Cal's or Oregon State's. They're still tough places to play. And so, you know, you've got to do those things and take those things on the road. So I'm interested to see how they do that. And I think back to your original question, that will give us a really good indicator of what the state of the program is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you know, with recruiting, I think it'll be really interesting to see what Utah pulls off in this 2026 class. I think it's important to keep in mind they're playing catch up with a lot of these prospects, right? Coming in together as a staff in April. A lot of these prospects have been recruited for a couple years now by certain college staffs, and so playing a lot of catch up. Right, we've seen a couple guys eliminate them from their process. Junior County, who, you know, when I was told when certain guys joined the program that junior was going to be a big priority, and unfortunately Utah wasn't able to make up the sort of ground that they needed to stay in that one. But you're seeing them linked to top 100, top 150 type of prospects, way more than we've seen in recent years, and I think that's really exciting. And I think it speaks to the point of emphasis that Alex and Wes Wilcox have with recruiting and bringing in, you know, highly talented players. They're going to continue to push for Abdou Toure and try to you know, pin down that official visit with him. You know, he's a top 30 type of prospects, and he would be the type that, you know, he would be the centerpiece of a class, of anybody's class really in the country. But they've got a couple other guys, Hurley Brutus, who just scheduled his official visit. Great name, by the way.
Yeah, all
Just
name team
fantastic.
right
All
there.
name team.
You
Just
know, offer him
incredible.
on the spot. I don't
Yeah.
understand that. Like, let's
Oh,
get it done,
yeah.
guys.
Why wasn't he offered before? Like, Hurley, come on.
Yeah,
Brutus, come on.
yeah, you need
Jamin
that guy.
Sondrup, out of Springville, another 4-star type of kid, local kid. And so, you know, Utah's in the mix with a number of guys. And I think it's going to be important, to your point, for Alex and this program to deliver a quality product to sell to these prospects because, you know, while they're playing catch up with this 26 class, they're almost on equal footing with building these relationships with the 2027 class, and that's where you can start to see a lot of payoff with recruiting and with the point of emphasis that you have on recruiting high level talent. So we'll see what they do. But again, I'm with you. I think the vibes, the excitement has sort of died down just a little bit, just because it's out of sight, out of mind. Football's on the forefront of everybody's brain, and that's correct. That's the right
That's right.
mindset to
Yeah.
have. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not wrong for that.
Yeah.
But I think as we get closer, I think the excitement will again ramp up, and I think this will be a pretty fun year. So Andrew, man, it's always fun to have you on the podcast. I appreciate you. I'll be joining you soon. We'll
Yes.
have another one of
Yeah.
our fun conversations, deep, long, hour-long conversations, however long we go.
Yeah.
But really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking some time, man.
Our off-season grades, they might be a little bit different this year.
Might be. Just maybe.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, let the people know what you've got in the works. I know you just published an episode, but let them know anything else on the horizon.
Yeah, so I've got the episode that's out right now. My latest episode is just breaking down the schedule, going through all the numbers, the metrics, kind of doing a best case, worst case, that sort of thing. It's 36 minutes, so it's very consumable for that drive home. I've also been going through the Rick Majerus biography over the summer, My Life on a Napkin. And so I've put
Heck
that
yeah.
out. It's like a
Yep. It's
6-part
been great.
series.
Yep.
And so, there's a lot of really interesting insights there that you get about both Rick and Utah basketball and Alex Jensen. And going back and listening to the things that he has to say about Alex Jensen are really, number one, interesting, but also hilarious. Like he talks about how when he saw Alex come off the plane after his Mormon mission, that he cried because it looked like he put on 100 pounds, and just stuff like that. So I've got that, and of course, we'll be carrying on through all the way to basketball season, with various previews and other things like that. So check us out, Runnin Hoops Pod, over on X and wherever you get a podcast.
Andrew, man, you do a great job. Again, appreciate you taking some time to hop on with me on the Blockcast, and we'll keep in touch and get you back on the podcast much sooner than the last time.
Yes,
So
sir. Can't wait.
appreciate you, dude. All right, Andrew.